So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. This is our RTC. It is a very special event today. The RTC events, as you may or may not know, are regional training centre events, which means we get an opportunity to share knowledge and skills, mainly to do with educational technology, not just to our teachers, but to a wider audience as well. And that's why today's event is special, because we've got people tuning in from Malaysia, from Atlanta in America. And that's unfortunately probably not because of me. It's because we've got a very special guest, which is Priya Lakhani, who's the CEO of Century Tech, which is an AI platform that we've engaged with at RGS Worcester. And certainly many of our teachers are enjoying using that platform at the moment. My name is John Jones. I'm the Director of Innovation at the 4 RGS Worcester schools. We have the senior school where I'm currently based. But I work at the RGS Dodderhill as well, which is a girls' school up the road in Droitwich. We've got RGS The Grange, which is one of our prep schools, and RGS Springfield, which is a smaller prep school based in the centre of town. The RTC events are a community of educators and institutions, and we provide online and face-to-face training. This one obviously is virtual, and that means we can actually speak to Priya Lakhani. Now, Priya, I hope you don't mind me giving a bit of an introduction to you.
Go ahead.
Priya well, where do we start? She's the CEO of Century Tech, which is an award-winning AI company, and her mission really is to make sure teachers across the world, which is why this international audience is so important, can remove learning roadblocks so that all children can succeed and fulfill their potential. She's been awarded the Business Entrepreneur of the Year by the Chancellor in 2009, the Office of the Order of the British Empire in 2014, which is an OBE, which is quite remarkable. She's been a business advisor to the UK's coalition government, was appointed to the UK Government AI Council in 2019, and is, as we know, we've got some people that are actually fans of Priya because she's well known. She's a regular commentator on the BBC, and she's here this afternoon to provide really an overview of AI, artificial intelligence, what it is, its role in education, what it promises, what it actually delivers, and of course the challenges that it may or may not pose. So I'll pipe down now, and I'll pass on to Priya. Priya, how are you this afternoon? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I decided to do my switch there onto the screen so that everyone doesn't have to, stand there being really bored waiting for me to do it. I'm really, really good. I'm so excited to be speaking to all of you today. So thank you so much for sharing some of your Wednesday evening to the Atlanta person, Wednesday afternoon, maybe early afternoon, and I think it's somebody from the east, I think, so maybe some of that evening with us. So no, thank you so much for inviting me, John and Matthew, today. Really, really excited to be here. Are you happy for me to just launch and dive right into what we're here to talk about today? More than happy, Priya. I'll mute my mic now and let you crack on. Great. And if there are any connectivity problems, don't worry, everyone, because John, I'm sure, will start screaming at me and I'll realise that something's gone wrong. It's just the way of the world, isn't it? And the way that we've all had to adapt. So I'm here to talk to you about artificial intelligence and how it impacts teaching and learning. And we are very, very proud partners of RGS. There's always more that we can be doing. But today, I really want to go back to the why. Why do we have the need for these sorts of systems, and what can they actually do? Because when we present it in this particular way, I think, your brain will go 100 million miles an hour in terms of all of the applications in which this could be really useful. And that's what we really want to do. We want to create, we want to innovate, but we want to do that in a way that really solves problems. So John's going to give me a thumbs up because he's going to tell me if he can see my screen. Can you see my screen, John? Brilliant. So the main two issues that I wanted to solve when I started thinking about this 8 years ago in education that really affect the front line of education are, why do we still have the one-size-fits-all delivery of education? Why do we have a system where we're often got teachers standing at the front, we've got a classroom in front of them? During COVID, it wasn't much different. Even though you went onto Zooms, Teams, Google Meet, teacher lecturing on screen to 20 or 30 individual students. We still continue to deliver that one size fits all of education. And we know that every student deserves a personalised, differentiated education. Now, it's not that teachers aren't trying to do this, right? Because teachers are often trying to differentiate for every student. But we do give our teachers a really impossible task. If you have even more than 2 or 3 students in front of you at any given time, it's hard to personalise for any one of them, and to find out where are the individual needs, where do I need to make an intervention. That's really hard even for a couple of students, let alone 20 or 30. So teachers have this impossible task. They definitely try and get over it, but it's very, very difficult for them to do. The second problem that I looked at was in terms of teacher time. So this how I came about this, 60% of teachers' time is spent on admin, so marking, planning and assessing. So actually teachers don't spend most of their time doing what they signed up to do, which is coming and teaching. And I found this out because about 8 years ago, or just over 8 years ago, on this government advisory board that John just mentioned, I was sitting there and I was running Masala. I don't know if you know it, but I think there's some Waitroses and Ocados and some big supermarkets and garden centres around all of you in terms of where you live. Maybe not in Malaysia or in Atlanta, but I was operating a food company, and part of the food company, I was feeding people, homeless people, underprivileged people, a hot meal for every unit of product I sold in supermarkets here. We were providing the pentavalent 5-in-1 vaccine to underprivileged children across Africa, and we were building schools in the slums of India. And that was this is my reason to be, my raison d'etre, this is why I'm here. I want to try and change the world. In one of those government meetings, I remember a minister coming in and saying that 20% of the nation is being failed and they can't read, write, do well enough in maths to get a decent job at the end of the day. And I thought, well, why am I funding schools in Commonwealth countries that all replicate the British model if the British model doesn't work? So I went to these schools. I went to some of the best schools in the country. I went to some of the most challenged. And across the board, I could see these two themes. These were the themes that teachers were talking about. But the reason I mention that is by going into the schools and speaking to teachers, it was amazing how many of them complained, not in a terrible way, but on this workload issue, this issue of I'm spending all my time basically bogged down in paperwork. I don't finish work till 10 o'clock in the night. I spend my weekends planning my lessons. Everyone thinks teaching's really easy, that we finish at 3:30 and have long holidays. It's just not true. So how can we try and reverse this, where teachers spend their time teaching, making timely, targeted interventions? They spend time on the pastoral care of their students. We know well-being is already a really big issue. It will become an even bigger issue. How do we allow teachers to do what they came to do? So these were the two main problems that I picked up on by going into schools. And I also, when I was a barrister, so I'm a lot older than I know you all think that I am. But anyway, in my first career, I was a lawyer. And in the evenings, I used to teach law to postgraduates. And actually, these were similar themes that I was experiencing while I was lecturing and teaching them at university during the evenings. So I thought, well, OK, we know the problems. What do we want? What do we want to achieve there? You've got to be very, very clear on what the goals are. The goals were clear. Every educator wants to improve learning outcomes and they want efficacy in learning. Everybody, I don't know why this is somehow shaking this presentation, but I think we'll go with it for now. Everyone wants differentiation and personalisation for every student. We want to increase student agency in learning. We don't want to have a spoon-fed education, so that when students leave the RGS schools, any school, they leave education and they don't actually know how to learn for themselves. We want them to try and take control of their learning experience, so that as technological innovation occurs, the pace of innovation is so fast, as the world changes, as we need new skills in 2030 and 2040, these children who then become adults, they can actually resource themselves, they can upskill themselves to be able to survive and thrive in the new world. So how do we increase agency in learning? We obviously want high quality learning resources. We know formative assessment is incredibly powerful. So for those of you that are not educators, the idea that we're constantly providing these little sort of informal tests every so often, maybe every week in every subject. And that's really about then gathering the data, which students understand what, so we can analyse that data and make timely targeted interventions. If you're interested in formative assessment, a man called John Hattie, very famous in the education world, did a huge amount of work on putting the powerful data in the right hands, in the hands of educators, is one of the most important things we can do in education. But with that comes a problem. If we want constant testing, if we want lots of formative assessment, that's workload for teachers, right? It's creating a test, distributing a test, marking the test, becoming a data analyst to figure out who needs what in the test. This is the issue. But we know it's really powerful. We know teacher time is valuable. I often talk about CPD. We also want teachers to have time to invest in themselves. So I went around the world about 8 years ago, and I looked for the platform to bring to the United Kingdom to solve those problems and achieve these goals. And I went particularly to the USA, where there was lots and lots of talk about platforms. And what I found was that schools, even in the United Kingdom, were using the learning management system. And they said, but Priya, we've got technology. And I went into the schools and I said, well, let's look at the technology. Now, the learning management system is where innovation went to die. And I'm going to say that. I know the technology founders will hate me for it, but it's true. A learning management system is simply a system that people use to upload homework, assignments, send it across to their students. They get their timetable on it and all those other things that are important for communication to parents and to children. And then they do their homework, they upload it, and then they send it back and the teacher marks it. You see how that's exactly how homework on an exercise book works. You know, teacher gives it to you, you go away, you do it, you hand it back, you get feedback, and so on. So the learning management system simply digitizes exactly what we did manually and on paper. And that's not the point of digital transformation. When we talk about digitization and digital transformation and how it has transformed every sector in the world, everything that you all do on your mobile phones, the point is to use digital technologies to transform the process, to make it smarter, to make it efficient, to make it better. So I looked at this and thought, no, this isn't the solution. This isn't going to remove the one size fits all. In fact, it's just the one size fits all online, right? It's like the maths app. The standard maths app is the one size fits all online. No matter how complex they say it is, its programming is as clever as the human who programmed it. Actually, we want more than this. So I went away and I looked at AI and big data and all these really big terms. And I went away and I learned them myself. So I have a couple of several nano degrees in AI, machine learning, deep learning. And I'm going to boil it all down to a couple of slides and tell you all what it's all about. So I went away and thought, what are these technologies? Could they make a difference in education? I haven't seen any of this in education while I've been walking around schools, colleges, and universities. Why not? We're using AI and big data when we shop, when we watch movies, when we invest, when we're saving. We're using them in all these apps. Why hasn't it touched education? Education has gone from a blackboard to an interactive whiteboard, and that's it. Is it going to be useful? So I'm going to start with explaining what it is. If you think about us as humans and how we learn from experience, right? So we learn how to walk, by trying and then falling a lot and then trying again, and we learn again. Humans learn from experience. That's how we grow. That's what makes us really intelligent. If we think about a computer follows instructions, input and then output. It doesn't do anything else, right? So the idea is you type something in, something else will occur because it's been programmed with a set of rules to do essentially what you've commanded it to do. So years ago, people sat down together and said, well, hang on, can we make a computer learn from experience so that we have essentially an intelligent machine? And the answer was yes. A computer won't learn from experience in the same way that you and I learn from experience, but it learns from data. If we give a machine so much data, not even the data that we think is relevant, but lots of data, we call it unstructured data sets, right? And we program the machine to be able to make sense of that data, then we've got something that could potentially perform in an intelligent way. And now here is the difference between AI and machine learning and a computer that also has a lot of data. A computer with just a lot of data that crunches through that data and analyzes that data, just like actually RGS schools might do when they look at their student data. That's essentially using data science to make sense of the data. What we're talking about here is a machine that's programmed to take the data, learn from the data, and then continually learn by itself. So any second there is more data being fed into this machine, it's getting smarter and smarter and smarter. So what happens is there comes a point, right, where this machine is looking for patterns and correlations in data to find where are the statistically significant patterns, where are the correlations, what might this data actually be telling us. There comes a point where there's so much data and so much analysis this machine's performing by itself, new data will change its assumptions, it learns more and more, that actually it becomes much more intelligent than a human being who may well take months and months, if not years, to crunch the same amount of data. The machine can do it in a second. There are certain things a machine can and can't do, though. And so I urge you, when you're thinking about artificial intelligence, think about human intelligence. I always say, what's the difference between AI and HI? Sounds mad because no one else is really talking about HI, but it's the best way to think about it. You know, if you think about what makes a human human, what makes us different, right? All of the attributes of a human that a machine could never replicate. Then think about AI. What could a computer crunch in terms of data and information and analyze really quickly and then become smarter about? That is the difference between those two areas. So the big question about will teachers ever be overtaken by robots? Will AI ever overtake education? Is a very easy answer. It's no. Because no AI can ever replace the one-to-one interaction between a teacher and a student. But what an AI can do, I'm just about to show you, is really powerful to augment teaching and learning. We can make every teacher far more powerful in the classroom. I like to say the most important person in the classroom, we say, is the child. The most powerful is the teacher. Why are we not arming our teachers with all the insights they need to go and be super teachers? What can it do for the learning experience by removing the one size fits all? Hence really focusing on those two problems that I started off with. And I'm just going to show you what we've done to allow this to happen. So look, I still went to the US and I thought, right, I need to find this technology and bring it to the UK and convince government to buy it in for our schools. And I went away and I found a company. I saw these companies I was experiencing, like media companies, security companies, medical companies, food and drink, all using machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then I came across an education company and they were using AI. And when you hear about companies using AI in education, be very careful, because 40% of companies, as identified by the Financial Times, say they use AI when they don't. They use it as a marketing term. And that's really dangerous. It can really mislead people. But this company, fair play, was using machine learning. And so I went there and I had a look at their technology. The problem is they built a machine where there was, just imagine maths and English content on the machine. Okay, imagine the content, the digitized content that make up the curriculum. But they built the algorithms very similar to the way Amazon works. Now, if you think about Amazon, and whoever's in front of you in this virtual room, split them in half. If half of you go on Amazon and start buying headphones and USB sticks and microphones and mice for the computer, etc., you know Amazon's going to basically take patterns and correlations in what you like and what you like to buy, and then offer you a lot more tech and a lot more kit. The people on your right-hand side go onto Amazon and you buy Thomas the Tank Engine bath robes and bath towels, and you buy Peppa Pig blankets and lots of character type stuff. You know they're going to start suggesting lots of children's related things, and you can fill up your house with colourful plastic items if you like. But the point is, Amazon will use its recommendation engine based on what you're buying and what you're searching for and what you're liking to provide you with more. So the education company did that. The problem and the reason why it didn't work, and they spent over $160 million on this technology, is because education doesn't work like that. You need to put the ed before the tech in ed tech, right? In education, if a child let's look at the UK for a start, and excuse me, Malaysia, who's here in this call, because it maybe doesn't apply to you, but we have some children who like to be a little bit naughty in the Western world. And what they might well do is go straight to biology and straight to reproduction and go, look at that. That's really, really fun to look at for only a few minutes, but they might keep going back with their naughty friends. What would a machine that constantly gives you what you like give you in your recommended path? A lot more anatomy and a lot more biology. And that is what this machine essentially did. There are also children, not so naughty, who would go and they would say, well, I really like English. I don't like maths because I'm not good at maths. And you and I all know that's a terrible statement and it shouldn't exist and it's simply untrue. No person is simply just bad at mathematics. But A student may say, but I'm an English person. And that's because my mother even said, yes, sweetheart, you're very good at English because I'm good at English. We know the parents that absolutely destroy the growth mindset when you go home and they say, yes, darling, I wasn't good at maths either. You get it from me. And it's not obviously hereditary. But the point is the child may then go on and continue just to look at English. So what would a machine like this do? Just give you a lot of English. So it didn't quite work. So we went away and found out that no one in the world had any technology like this and we needed to build it. So we went away and built an AI machine that uses a blend of machine learning. And there's an argument about whether machine learning is actually AI, but machine learning with deep learning artificial intelligence. So this is real AI. So building neural networks. Neural networks you'll have heard of in terms of people that build technology to be able to recognize an image. You'll have heard about the technology that recognized cats on the internet, pictures of cats and whether they were cats or not. Okay, so there's different technologies and different methodologies in terms of how you use this. But how can we build a machine that it becomes smarter every nanosecond? Combine it with neuroscience. What do we know about the brain? How do we know about how we learn? What do we know about cognitive load theory, memory function? All of these areas, space learning, engagement, how to engage students, how to motivate them. Carol Dweck's growth mindset work, which is a little bit controversial now, but it's kind of common sense actually. Combine it with learning science, what we know about pedagogy, and build a machine that can learn how every single brain learns. So this was several years ago, and literally, I'm not trying to hype it up. It is a machine that is built to learn how John, Matthew, Leslie, Ian, Andrew, Sarah's, everyone's brains learn. What the machine does is, and it took a while to build it, but essentially, it's a machine where children can log in anywhere in the world, any language, any curriculum, any language. Today, it's already used in Arabic, it's used in Spanish, it's used in Estonian, it's used in English, right? And any curriculum. I'm going to show you school-related things now, but we've got law and finance at university being taught on this machine. There's hair and beauty, there's astronomy, and then you've got sort of primary and secondary school content. When a student logs in, like Amelia here, she logs in and it tracks every mouse movement she makes, a bit like Google search. It gives her this recommended pathway of what she needs to learn. And it understands her knowledge, her skills, her gaps in knowledge, her gaps in skills, her effort levels, her pace of learning, her difficulty levels, her preferences, when something goes from her short-term to long-term memory. She answers questions on the machine. It gives her personalized feedback. She has access to maths, English, the sciences, and English literature from primary to secondary school. And essentially what the machine's doing is it's tracking every nanosecond of behaviour and mouse movements from Singapore to Sydney to Somerset. Every single time a student is on this machine from anywhere in the world, it's getting smarter. How does Amelia learn? How much does she engage? What are the skills being asked in this particular question? What are the difficulty levels? What's the pace of learning? Is there a literacy issue? And I'll show it to you. So you won't see this online anywhere, but I show it in these sorts of presentations. So for a student, for example, the machine may well collect, she logged in February. This is how long she logged in for, her content. You'd expect to see this in any platform. Most platforms, especially learning platforms for maths, for English, or the subjects they take, when you logged in, your page views, your answers to questions, and when you logged out, 5 or 6 data points. Actually, at Century, using AI, because we're reliant on big data, we take everything. If you don't do anything on our platform, it pings all the data every 2 seconds. We know that she looked at a question. We know the literacy level of that question. We know how many boys who are dyslexic from the north of England who are on free school meals looked at that yellow triangle. How did they behave after they looked at that yellow triangle? Where did they go? We are trying to understand how the students actually learn. So the idea is that then the machine can start to identify, how do we motivate this student? How do we offer them proficiency in a subject by trying to figure out what they do and don't understand? Then that's removing the one size fits all and providing personalized learning and trying to really differentiate for every student by providing Amelia, for example, with that recommended pathway of this is what you don't understand now, do it. But it's not just, for example, like the American system of giving students just what they like. There is an algorithm in there that gives students what they sometimes found a bit easy. And that's because if you always give students what they don't like and what they get wrong, they'll never log in again. But the idea is to be able to balance these multiple algorithms to make it work for every student. On that second point about teachers, I think I've gone back one and it hasn't played. Let me just see if I can play this. We give the teachers the data. So on the 60% of teacher time, a dashboard that tells, for example, the RGS staff, Edward Carr here is struggling. This student prays for commitment. This student needs more effort. And then going into a dashboard that tells the teacher exactly where to focus, where to challenge, how much effort did they make. Sorry, something's wrong with that video, but you get the drift in the sense that the point is that when you've got an AI and when you've got a big data platform that's tracking all of this, the machine is fantastic at crunching numbers. It can provide that analysis to teachers. So that's 60% of time spent marking, planning and assessing. Why do we make our teachers do that? It's not about trying to just reduce workload for workload's sake, although I would always argue actually they do work really, really hard and you ought to reduce their workload. In fact, we ought to shave the curriculum so they can focus a little bit sometimes more on the depth rather than the breadth and give teachers a chance at doing what they wanted to do. But actually what this is about, it's about empowering the teachers. When they're having that time with the student, would you rather they have that time trying to figure out what the problem is, or knowing what the problem is and then actually being a teacher and being able to make that intervention? So it's about that recommended pathway with integrated assessments. It's about advanced analytics and easy to use dashboards. And it's about options in terms of curriculum and content. So what else does this allow us to do? Well, essentially it allows us to learn exactly how the students behave, as I said. So we know how, for example, the difference between a dyslexic student, someone who's ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, with a 96% success rate. Even if RGS do not tell us that one of your students is ASD, we can tell. 96% accuracy. Do we tell you no? Because we're not a diagnostic platform. But imagine that student's recommended pathway just becoming highly more accurate for the way in which that student behaves. That's really, really important to us. We actually have over 5 million questions answered per week. But what we found was through independent analysis and study, we improve outcomes by 30% across the board. Why do I say across the board? I'm really proud of it. Yes, we have some of the leading independent schools, not just in the country now, but across the globe. But this is also the case when it comes to some of the more deprived backgrounds and disadvantaged backgrounds. If you can improve the baseline of education by 30% across the board, that is well worth spending the £15 million I've spent building this machine. If you can have one child feel more confident that they know exactly that they can come into a platform in the quiet of their own room, in their own home, to figure out actually and increase that agency and learning to help them along with the subject rather than sitting there stuck in a textbook, figuring out, do I go back to the last chapter or do I go 5 chapters before? That is worth £15 million. In terms of increases in standards, so we've got some primary schools talking about 15% increases in depth in learning. We've got secondary schools saying we saw our GCSE grades for certain students that use this jump up at least a grade. For teachers, saving 6 hours a week, that's nearly a working day. When you look at a teacher, people might say it's only 6 hours. I'm like, no, that's a whole working day of a teacher's life. This is well worth it for the teachers that use it. The UFI did an independent study, and they found for students that often actually perform really poorly in maths and English, they particularly focus on literacy and numeracy. Imagine 10 times national progress for a student just using this for less than an hour a week. So for them, it was 10 minutes a nugget a week. That sort of impact is really, really large. Now, obviously, it doesn't impact every single student in every single place in the sense that not everyone wants to engage with the technology platform. But when students use this platform, you do see a direct result on their outcomes and on their results. So very quickly, but what's going on then with AI and EdTech? So I've put this in here because we've got Roger's adoption curve that's very famous that most people involved in tech know. You've got an adoption curve, you've got your innovators, your adopters, and we've got politely and affectionately what we like to call the laggards at the end. They're the kickers and the screamers. No matter how much you tell them that this works, why aren't you using it? They won't use it. What you found with EdTech and pre-COVID was that Century, particularly, we're the globally leading company literally across the globe in this space. Even the Chinese use our product. You'd say the Chinese have advanced AI. They do an assessment. They have billions of data points on assessment. They didn't bother doing learning because for some cultures and some people, assessment is education. And I say, no, it is not. Assessment is part of learning. Learning is the holy grail of education. That's why we pick up the mouse movements. That's why we learn how you learn. Assessment is definitely part of it. But, assessment has become the tail that wags the dog. And that really is a shame. So what you saw pre-COVID was Century was very much globally in the innovators corner, the innovators and the schools that wanted to take it forward. We're talking, up to like 8 years ago, a long time ago. They took it on first. They tried it. They piloted it. They worked with us on how to make it better, how it works in the classroom, how to achieve more. So we could iterate and over iterate just to make sure we got the right product. We then, I think, just before around March last year, before lockdown here, we got into sort of line of who were the early adopters. What was really interesting is COVID obviously turned everything upside down, and we already have countries, and if not lots of schools in countries, in the early majority stage. And what's really happened is that COVID has catalysed the use of AI in education. So those parties who are sitting there saying, it's not for me, we're looking at it in 5 years' time, I think you either have to get on this train or it's going to leave without you, because the schools and the best schools in the world are using it and adopting it en masse. We are the back-end engine for some of the largest publishers in the world as well, and now going into higher education. And what we're starting to do is work with that analysis side of a student's credentials. What does that actually mean? Should we not just measure? We shouldn't just be measuring your maths and your English. We should be measuring what Matthew's out there doing, in a field somewhere and camping near Milton Keynes. What skills are those students learning? And a technology like Century is able to capture all of those. Last year, because some of you know that we're a social enterprise at heart, I founded this because I was the 6-year-old in East Africa who said to my parents, I don't like the poverty around us. I don't think it's fair. I want to change the world. We'll always do the right thing. We were the first company globally last January when Wuhan announced it was locking down to offer AI free across the world. Everyone followed suit. And I wrote to RGS, I wrote to everybody and said, in solidarity, can you support me doing this? Because obviously many schools subscribe to Century. During lockdown, we did do it, and the usage was insane. Our platform was robust, it stayed up. But then I also said, I'm going to offer it to the country when March happened. And it was amazing in terms of the take-up. This is where Century's true AI, we have true AI. We're one of the very few companies across the globe that have actual AI, particularly in the UK. This is where we were pre-COVID. This is where we were middle of last year. And this is where we are now. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that it really is a case of this is now happening. This is taken seriously. The early adopters and the innovators are giving case study after case study about why this works. Today, the chairman of a school chain called me and he said, I don't understand why the British government haven't taken Century and put it into every school. I said, well, I do understand why they haven't. And it's mostly nothing to do with Century. It's just, it is what it is. And you can't hold your breath for things like that. And I'm not worried about it. And he said, but I don't understand if our school, it's a very big brand name. He said, if our school, if Eton, Cognita and Nord Anglia and all of us are using it, he said, we can't all be wrong, can we? And it was really interesting about the we can't all be wrong, can we? It's the first time I heard it today. It was really powerful. And I thought, this is why we need case studies. I know that sometimes this technology can seem like an edge to a school. I do understand that perspective. And somebody came to me at the IAPS conference and said, but we use it and we don't really want our competition down the road using it. And I said, the thing is, Century isn't your competitive element. What you do with the time saved from Century is your competitive element. Is Matthew Warren still in the sticks in Milton Keynes because you've got the time to invest and send him there? That's your competitive element. Parents send their children to schools, we know, for so many different reasons. And yes, academics is one of them. But actually, my job is to ensure that every child across the globe has access to this sort of technology. Those that don't have teachers, those that have teachers, because the idea is we need to raise the baseline of education. My view is if it's good enough for RGS, because it's the gold standard technology, then it's good enough for everyone else. What I don't like is that the RGSs of the world, because you've got pioneers, you've got a John Jones, you've got a Matthew Warren, of course you're going to go and get the best tech because you've got the minds to be able to innovate and be a pioneer, right? The problem is not everybody has a John Jones and a Matthew Warren. So how can we use your John Jones and your Matthew Warren to say, here's the case study, look, it works. Raise that baseline of education. Stop giving the poor man a poor man's technology. raise that baseline, and then use the time to be able to focus on the skills and everything else that a school provides, because that's the HI, that's the human intelligence side of the system. So I'll finish there and I'll leave this on. It's feedback from some of our schools. I haven't put RGS in here for now because I think it's good to get a flavour of what other people say about it. But I don't know if we've got time for questions, John, but I'd be very, very happy to welcome questions from anyone.
Priya, that was amazing. Thank you ever so much. Yeah. Really, really, really brilliant to listen to that. And we've certainly got a little bit of time left over for some questions. I've got some questions of my own that we kind of curated initially. And if I can rustle through those relatively quickly, then we can. If Matt, if you don't mind putting the chat function open again, we'll take a few questions now and see if we've got time for that as well. Because I'm sure there's some questions people would like to ask you. There's so many interesting themes. I don't really know where to start, frankly, with the questions from me. But I suppose the first one that I thought of, and from discussions I've had, is given all you've said about the positives of artificial intelligence and all these incredible things that not that it just promises, that it does. Why do you think it gets a bad press? Why is there that skepticism about artificial intelligence? Is it all down to the Terminator, or is there someone else that we should be worried about?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I get it all the time, and people always, there are the skeptics. I think there's too much of a Hollywood sort of, this is Armageddon. And people don't understand how it works. I mean, that's just the truth. They don't understand how it works and its application in a certain sense. Look, with AI, there'll be good uses and there'll be bad uses. And we have to be very, very careful about that. I'm very pro-regulation in this area. I co-founded the Institute for Ethical AI in Education with Sir Anthony Selden, for example, just to tackle these issues, because Century is leading the way here. And I thought, well, hang on, if we're leading the way, what we don't want is a follow-up with lots of companies that aren't dealing with this in the ethical way. So, but actually, the bad rep that sometimes AI gets isn't even to do with that, because you'll often read the articles that are posted and there's no mention of ethics in any of those articles. It's a lack of understanding, and also it's generally written by someone who's risk averse. So on that adoption curve, but you get people who want to try stuff out and they like change, they like to see if it has an impact. You get those that then look at the ones who tried things and see if the evidence is there. If they've got the evidence, it works. They also want to try things. They're sort of middle ground, right? And they're the majority. Then you get people who just don't like change. I had a head teacher who said, I really don't want to use anything like this. I don't want things to change. I don't want to scrap GCSEs and high stakes assessment, because we just get the best grade. We get some of the best grades in the country. And it was all about grades. It was all, and then actually in the end, funnily enough, he did sign up to Century because then you could get better grades. But actually, I remember thinking, that's really interesting. That head teacher, yes, you're focused on grades, but education is so much more than that. And that conversation is happening now. So it is really about, you've got to look at who is presenting that argument. Do they actually understand what it is? More often than not, I find if I say, what is AI? So one of those individuals, they can't answer the question, or they certainly can't answer it accurately. And what I really enjoy is a very well engaged conversation about that, what do we need to look out for, the concerns about AI by somebody who understands it. That is brilliant, and that was the Institute. The Institute had a global council. We had head teachers, we had skeptics on there, but they understood. And then what we came to was an amazing framework, which is like a checklist for schools, right? So schools can go on and make sure they've asked all those questions of an AI supplier to ensure they're getting the impact and they're getting the outcomes, which is great. It's helping, it's personalizing, but it's addressing and mitigating any risks that could exist in there. For example, things like algorithm bias, right? So there's all these big terms that we hear. And actually at Century, I'm really proud to say our entire tech infrastructure doesn't allow algorithm bias. So your personal data, any student at the RGS schools who's using Century, they've got their name, their demographic. That's only used for the analysis side. So when I showed you those charts and said, we know how you behave, that's done on the analysis side. The AI engine that personalizes learning for them has no idea who they are. Because otherwise, you could just imagine an AI engine would know a lot about you. Like, well, this is how females from an ethnic minority like to learn maths, so we're going to give them, right, and that's really terrible. So there are some really good intelligent conversations about how to make this truly work for people. And those are the ones that I like to have, rather than the sort of quick, bad headline press that we not Century doesn't get that, but as in AI in general gets that sort of Hollywood-esque kind of bad press.
No, that's really interesting. It's interesting you mentioned Anthony Seldon as well, because I read his book a few years ago, which referenced you and
That's
Century.
why I helped him write the AI chapter in a hotel lobby. But that same hotel lobby, he said, "Come over and let's just chat about AI." So we did, and he said, "Have you got any points in my book?" So that's what I went to do with Rose Luckin. So both of us sat with him in a hotel lobby. That same hotel lobby was where I said over toast, because Anthony laughed at me that I was having toast at 2:00 in the afternoon. And I said, I think there ought to be some sort of committee or something to help with the ethics of AI in education. I'd be really happy to help set one up. And obviously Anthony's style, he said, it can't be a committee, it's got to be an institute. And then it became this whole big institute. So that was yes, the summer, I remember it being sort of June the 18th or something a couple of years ago. And that's exactly where that happened.
That's it. And when someone like that, someone with that amount of credibility in education, is singing the praises of AI and Century Tech, it really sparked my interest, actually. And I suppose another theme you touched on there as well is the other side of it, with not just with ethics, with data, but with companies that claim to have adaptive technologies. Do you have any advice about how the punter can distinguish between the genuine machine learning and the adaptive learning, which is just something entirely different and cheaper and not doing the same thing?
Yeah, so one way, if you're interested in reading, so Professor Lakhani and I created and wrote the No BS Guide to AI for Education. It's really simple. I'm sure it's available online, and if it's not, I can send it to you, John, and you can forward it on to everyone. You can put it on the RGS blog or wherever you want, and it just gives you the lowdown on, look, this is how it works. And I think the best way to do it, unfortunately, is to ask the right questions, right? Because when you're speaking to somebody, I can tell within an instant if someone's got proper engineering behind their systems, proper cybersecurity, AI, because obviously it's unfair. I've got degrees in the space, right? But if you can understand it, even so much as I've explained it there, in terms of big data, collecting lots of data, if they can't answer those questions, they're not collecting big data. Big data is not 6 data points on a maths application platform. There's a lot of nonsense in the space. I'll tell you why it's harmful. It's not harmful for Century. We're quite large now, and schools speak to schools, frankly. They just do. Teacher down the road will speak to teacher down the road and say, we use this, it works. There'll be a teacher married to with another teacher in another school. That then school will sign up. It works like that. I'll tell you why it's dangerous. It's dangerous because I remember once meeting a deputy head who said, I really love this. He came to see us at VET and he said, I love this technology. I really want to use it. This deputy head, I remember him being really remote. So I couldn't go and see him at the time. I didn't have the whole day to travel. I think it was like Devon or somewhere like that. And he went and presented to his SLT on his own and said, I really want to take on this technology. This is pre-COVID, right? And his SLT said, we really like it. We'll have a think about it. We'll let you know at the next meeting. At the next meeting, they had stumbled across a free AI platform, right? And nothing's free for a start, but free AI platform. And they said, well, we've taken your idea about using AI, but we're going to use this one instead. Now, that was a platform that advertised AI neuroscience, had no AI whatsoever in the back end, and they used it for a year. And all of the SLT said, this doesn't do anything in addition to a normal platform because it just works. Every student has the same experience. It's not personalized at all. And I remember the deputy head then coming to me a year later and saying to me and my team, it's so sad because I've now got double the effort to try and get these guys to look at your platform, which actually has AI, because they've now been convinced AI is not very good and it doesn't work. And so, you've wasted a lot of, time, potentially, cost, okay, if it was free, maybe not. But the issue in education is not about having the technology. It's about change management. In education, the biggest problem you've got is that somebody could say, I really like this. I can see how it works. convincing your SLT and convincing all your teachers to then take it on is a really hard task. This is why at Century we have an entire customer success team. All they do is change management in schools all day. They train schools, it's all free, they do it all, but they do it because that is so hard. So the danger of the bad sort of nonsense AI is that you lose that time and the change management of the education staff in terms of, it's not going to be the first thing on their mindsets. For many people, it's catch up, it's lack of funding, it's all sorts of things. That's the danger. And that's why it's so sad, But yeah, just ask the questions. By all means, look up the No BS guide to AI for educators. It's written by Professor Rose Luckin and myself. We co-wrote it a few years ago when we saw all of these platforms and we said, my gosh, we've got to do something about this. And if you look at a YouTube video on what is machine learning AI, even a very basic introduction one, you'll then have all the questions that you need to ask of a particular provider, and you'll be able to spot the real stuff from the fake stuff.
A cracking answer. And in fact, another book I read was actually by Professor Luckin, which was quite complicated, but
the machine learning one, yeah.
A really good oversight about AI, really. Right. I could spend all day asking you questions, but I feel a bit selfish doing that. So I'm gonna quickly run through the questions we've got in the chat. Sure. And see if we can get a few of those out with some answers. The first one I've got is from Martin Pope, who asks about whether AI can also track distraction and eye movement. Will this help with profiling?
Yeah, it can. So, Martin, we actually looked at that. So we looked at the Realize It cameras from Intel. Yeah. And so you can put that in. We were far more encouraged to use that sort of technology in parts of the world like the Middle East, right, than we were in the UK. So, yes, you can do that. You can then obviously capture more. Actually, what's really interesting is bone mapping software. So opening up the camera, it does not take your picture. You would never have the picture of a child. It just maps the bone structure. Because sometimes when a child says on Century, we do track their emotions. A child will say, I'm frustrated. And actually, they're not frustrated, they're disappointed. And there is a really big difference between the two, but they can't articulate that. And actually, your bones, the way your facial expression changes, can actually tell you that. So there is loads more you can do. The reason why we didn't put it into Century was when we did our pilot testing, schools just were not convinced it's not taking the picture of a child. They just didn't believe it. They said, it must be, it's opening the camera. And so, when I've got to sit there and convince everyone, this is the sort of technology you want to use, I thought I don't want to now be convincing them about cameras and no cameras. So I thought we'll leave it there. We don't need it now. But there are countries experimenting with that. As I said, for example, the Middle East, just got to be really careful. I'm not particularly pointing at the Middle East here, but obviously at Century, we will never build something where we think it also could be used in the wrong way. So for example, government gets hold of data in certain parts of world that tells them that the minute there was a history seminar and there was something in history that was spoken about in terms of their political beliefs, a child went, what? And if that obviously was sort of captured in certain parts of the world, that would not be good for said child. So as an ethical company, we wouldn't build that type of technology in, for those sorts of purposes. So yes, it can be used. My just big headline there is be careful about that sort of technology in certain parts of the world where it can be misused.
That's absolutely spot on. I think it's interesting that technology exists, but you're choosing not to use it for the right reasons. So next question, we've got one from Robert Lang, who talks about are you aware of the TPAC model? Yeah.
No, but my curriculum team will be. So we have a small army of teachers who are subject matter experts. They're often department heads. I'm guessing if this is this a technology thing or is this a curriculum thing?
It's an academic sort of model of integrating technology successfully, where you look at knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, subject content knowledge. So I think probably you've answered the question already by saying if you've got a team of teachers who work in the ed tech sector or have done, they'll be aware of that.
Yeah, we have a small army of them, and the reason why is we really do put the ed before the tech. I think there are a lot of in terms of design as well, so that may well be so they do the curriculum design, the learning design specialists. So this is probably their area and their field, and obviously I hired them for a reason, because I built essentially can we build something like this, and like the architecture in the background of how it works. But obviously when we started to think about curriculum and learning design, you have to bring in the specialist. But what's really interesting is no matter which, I don't know which, what specific model that is, but in terms of how they work, something else that we do that's quite interesting, and it makes for really interesting viewing. A fly on the wall would have a really good time looking at this, but normally you will often find every week you'll have neuroscientists, educational psychologists, teachers and purists, sort of curriculum design with engineers, and engineers who also have a gaming background, because some of our engineers are gamers, because the best engineers in these sorts of fields often come from banking or gaming, right? Because they're so much more advanced. So I hire that sort of talent. If you've got them all in a room, they're all purists. So they'll all argue and it's a lot of fun to watch. But you all sort of, it's respectful challenge. We have that nicest culture at Century. On the front of everyone's contract, we have a no backside rule, because I said I don't want to work with anyone who doesn't know how to look up in the morning at someone else and just say hi. You don't have to be best friends, but I mean, it's just like how we were all raised, be polite, don't ruin someone's day. But at the same time, they're top tier talent. If not just in the UK, then certainly, I'd look at the world, or even Europe. We have an amazing team, but when you get all of them together in a room with different disciplines, you'll get, I'm sure there are models that people are using, but there is always challenge. And we also get challenge from the likes of our schools, so we're quite happy to get a call from RGS saying, we'd like it to work in this way. Why do you not, or why do you think this is a reasonable way forward? And then we're constantly having those sorts of stakeholder and ambassador school conversations that really, so the idea here is it's about pushing us. We don't want to sit static and say, okay, we've built something, people like it. What else do you need? When you're doing CAGs and tags, we just built in this entire, RGS must have received it, but RNA, nugget ability. Every student who used Century reasonably well over the last year would have received a banding in that subject and in those topics for them compared to the world. And that's great. And then if that is given every so often, you can start to look at progress over time. So your conversations with the student, with their parents, become so much richer. What else can we do? What else can we do? It's not directly answering your question, Robert, I apologise. But, what I'm trying to say is people are pretty experienced in terms of, I'm sure, various models in the company. But what I love most about the company is the fact that everyone's always challenged. The idea is we come up with the best possible solution.
Brilliant. That's a great answer. And when you get that many smart people in a room, it would be very interesting to observe. You get that with teaching. The kids we teach are ridiculously clever on all sorts of topics. And when they get together, the collaboration and the discussions are really quite something. Right, we're short on time. Next question, Flavio. Flavio's questions quickly is, what is the role of local language in the adoption and efficacy of the AI engine?
So, sorry, what's the
role of local language? So
really good one. So Flavio, we had Spanish is quite easy. We had Arabic, right? Arabic's not that easy with AI, but what we did, Flavio, was so I said to my team, but they're not going to be very happy if it takes 5 years for the thing to develop, right, in terms of figuring out what's behind. We mapped it all to the English curriculum. So what happened was we took all of their maths and Arabic. I got Arabic specialists in London, right? So Rita in our team, if anyone's spoken to her, she's Arabic specialist. We got a couple of others. They all sat there and they mapped the English nuggets and topics and to the Arabic. So as soon as the Arabic went live, it knew and it learned and it went fast. And so you've just got to be thinking outside the box in that case. But yes, there are lots of languages, obviously, in the world. You're going to get better AI in terms of language and content from the ones that are better known in terms of technology. But Century works on behaviours. So we're about the brain and the neuroscience. So how you move on a platform and your pace of learning and, how quickly you answer questions. Are you guessing? Are you hesitating? Are you skipping? That the language doesn't matter. It just will quickly look at 30 students answer this question, 300 students answer this question, 3,000 answer this question. How quick, how fast do they operate elsewhere? So it starts to make connections in terms of content where it may not even understand the actual content in terms of the language, right? It will do that. That'll be the depth it gets later, but it will already make those connections. So it really is a combination of the neuroscience with the AI, not just relying on natural language processing and a language type of AI as other languages might, and other platforms that are a little bit more narrow might certainly be relied upon.
Another brilliant answer. I'm going to take one more question. I'm completely apologetic to everyone. I'm not going to get a chance to. All I've done is done in order of question. I've not picked any favourites, so I apologise if I missed out on you. I think I'm experiencing what it'd be like to be a sort of a chat show host now with the news coming up. So the question here is about what changed potentially. I think. Sorry, Alistair, this is your question. What change does or shouldn't AI make to the way classrooms run? For example, the teacher at the front of the classroom generating knowledge and discussion. Does AI stop that happening?
AI shouldn't stop that. So I always say, right, we need a personalised learning experience for the children. We've got to remember teaching and teaching styles are as personalised as learners have their learning, abilities and their behaviours. So the AI should complement and augment whatever the teacher is doing. You're going to get some teachers who like to still stand at the front, and they're actually pretty inspirational teachers. Why not, right? And they're going to engage the entire class. And then the way in which you use this technology, either in a blended learning model and a flipped learning model as independent learning, is totally up to you, and it should suit however you're delivering your teaching and learning. There are some teachers that really benefit just from walking around a room and making those sort of one-to-one interventions, and therefore the style in which you use the technology should be available. 50% of our schools use it one way, and exactly around 50% of our schools use it the other way. And that just goes to show that there's lots of flexibility, and that's why the machines have to be flexible. Just remember, these aren't here to replace the teacher. They're there. It's just a tool, right? It's like a pen. It's a tool to do something with. So how do you want to use this to augment what you do in the classroom? If you don't use it, well, you're as good as you were yesterday, and you're as good as whatever it is that you're doing. If you bring tools like this in and they empower you, you can see how you're still doing what you did yesterday, but actually you've taken it to a whole other level. And so it's about making it fit within your style. We haven't actually, Alistair, looked at the difference necessarily between schools that use it one way and schools that use it another. That's quite a good impact study that we should actually undertake. But, we don't want to second guess our teachers either. Teachers do an incredible job. We all know we've been, absolutely blown over and in awe of teachers, especially in the last year when everyone has seen what they've basically had to do. So I think with tools, our job and our responsibility, particularly at Century, this is how I see it. And I run Century how I see it, right? I'm sure other companies do it in their own way, but let's respect teachers for what they know and what they do. Let's give them something that makes their jobs that little bit easier, allows them to do what they do a bit more effectively, helps the students, helps the shy student in the corner who never wants to put a hand up. It's a personalised education for her. That's really our job. And so, it's got to be a pretty flexible. So it shouldn't be changing anything. But in a few years, you will see an AI school and it will come to the fore. And what will happen is kids will not have a timetable. It's kind of ridiculous that your timetables, we're a bit like the Swiss rail system in this country, aren't we? We know exactly where our children are going to be sat on October the 21st, or hopefully not on half term, but October the 21st at 2 p.m. It's English, and they're going to be studying this and the lesson plan. I mean, how is that even correct? I mean, we don't know what those students need in English, at that particular time. They're all different, aren't they? There's a range of abilities. You'll find a day when students will walk into a school and that morning they'll have a device, right? It's not about screen time all day. This is about teaching and learning and the human to human interaction, but their device will tell them where to go and sit, which classroom to go to. That classroom will be bespoke to their current needs of the day. It will be algorithmically created, I'm sure, so that everyone gets a bit of playtime, everyone gets physical time, everyone gets to do school trips with Matthew in the Milton Keynes Woods or wherever you are. And, everyone gets to do all of that, but it will be satisfying needs. That's actually using an AI platform like Century with actually a very basic technology that puts it all together. It's not that difficult. And the reason I'm telling you this is because this is kind of what I made up a few years ago and thought, we should build this because it will be great to put it into practice. That's where the teaching and learning, it's not the dynamic, but how a school looks and feels in terms of where you go in a timetable will change. But what you do in the classroom, in terms of your question, whether it's sort of didactic, whether it's interactive, whether it's flipped, whatever you're doing, that's totally up to the teacher, and I don't think that should change.
I think that kind of leads into the next question, which Manu asked, which is about universities and higher education. I guess that answers that question as well, because you get that same principle could be applied to those institutions as well.
Very quickly on that, online and AI is really there to stay on in HE, because HE has obviously been completely disrupted, as much as schools have. But, you know, in the last year, they've had to get on with remote learning. They've had to do a lot. And you're going to find that technology has an even bigger role in higher education. If you want to see the future of where academic analytics changes with AI, look at the US. They've got institutions that make really smart decisions. They can preempt dropout rates using AI, and they're doing that. I want this to come to our universities here. Hopefully it will, because we could really do with that. But, you know, we'll have to see. Again, it's the adoption curve. Everything with this sort of stuff is you've got to look at the adoption curve. It's not going to happen overnight. Who's going to take it first? Who's going to show it works? Where is that evidence going? Everyone else can then take it on. And then you do have our affectionate, lovely laggards at the end that just won't change. And the question is how does the leadership in a school deal with that? And if it is the leadership, then the parents will leave. So I think, you know, but this is sort of a 5 to 7 year kind of trajectory. I'll stop talking now because I know we're out of time.
I could chat to you forever, because you touch on so many things that are relevant in terms of leadership, change management, culture, all these things. You know, we discuss these things a lot at the RGS schools themselves, and we like to think of ourselves as one of those innovative schools that is prepared to disrupt and change. And certainly, if you've got some ideas that you want to trial with us or send to us to experiment with, then please do get in touch.
Absolutely.
But you're right, we've gone way past our time, which is not a bad thing. It just shows that what you've been saying has been fascinating, not just for me, but for everyone who's been kind enough to tune in tonight. We'll share this video with everyone who's been here. We'll share it with the other people that didn't turn up. We'll share it around the schools. We'll put it on our channels, etc. Because I think what you said, Priya, is so interesting and so valuable, and frankly, a lot more people need to hear it. Thanks ever so much for your time. Thank you, Matthew, for helping out with the administration of this, all the way from the woods of Milton Keynes. And I wish you all a very happy evening, and take care, and hopefully see you all soon.